You're listening to the Hazard Ground Podcast, with service members from across the military sharing their stories of combat and survival. And now, here's your host, Mark Zinno.
Welcome into the Hazard Ground Podcast. As always, we appreciate you joining us each and every week. Before we get to this week's guest, a 30-year member of the United States Marine Corps who spent time in Mortuary Affairs, also a civilian law enforcer. We'll get to him in just a moment. First, our normal announcements. Please continue to leave us reviews on Apple Podcasts as my hamster fell off the wheel. Leave us some Apple reviews. Give us 5 stars. Tell us why you love the show. As well, follow us on other social media sites, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Hazard Ground and Hazard Ground Podcast. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Smash that like button. Give that thumbs up to all the content there. We certainly appreciate you guys following along. Don't forget about our promotion with Amazon. Go to our website, hazardground.com. Click on the Amazon button at the bottom of the homepage or under the sponsors tab. And you guys can do all your normal Amazon shopping. You'll get redirected to Amazon. Do all your normal shopping. We'll get a percentage of what you guys spend, and then we'll donate a percentage of that back to some of the charities and organizations you've heard featured here on the show. So it's an easy way to help out veterans charities just by going to hazardground.com first. All right, this week's guest, as I mentioned, a retired Marine, retired at the rank of Sergeant Major, spent 30 years in the Marine Corps, all in the reserves. So a man after my own heart who spent a lot of time in the reserves, as I have in the Guard, along with active duty, 2 deployments to Iraq, and multiple other overseas assignments throughout his career, including in Mortuary Affairs. Also spent time as a civilian law enforcement officer and part of the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, working EOD and multiple other tasks there. He is Jamie Karnes, joining us here on the Hazard Ground. Jamie, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
All right. We talked before we started recording, just so everybody it's crazy that he was actually stationed down the block from, like, literally less than 100 yards away from where I used to live in Smyrna, Georgia. So, serendipity, right? Comes around for all of us. A small world, smaller military. But thanks so much for being here. And love to know how you got your start in the Marine Corps.
I'll throw out a small disclaimer, and hopefully by the end of this, be able to have it all make sense and circle back, full circle. But I delayed entry to the Marine Corps in 1988. I spent my entire high school senior year under contract. So the hell raising and the ripping and running that I had been doing had to kind of get quelled a little bit. So did that, went to boot camp in July of 89, and then subsequent, various MOS schools and other combat type training that the Marine Corps would put us through. Yes, I was a career reservist, did do the deployments like most everybody. I think at some point or another through the 2000s decade, got touched in some form or fashion with either presidential recall orders or something like that. But the disclaimer would be that if it hadn't been for the Marine Corps, I would not be here probably today. As far as I'd probably just be getting parole from prison. Because that was me back in the mid to late 80s. Never ran afoul of the law. However, I definitely fractured, 1 or 2 along the way and skirted, some of the folks in my local area growing up. But yeah, so the Marine Corps was a huge win for me. And I call it that because the Marine Corps did more for me than I think I did for it, for the institution. I did leave my mark, I think, in a positive way. Position improvement is always continuous. So I tried to leave things, better than when I found it with the various units that I was in. But I knew at an early age that I would be in the military, some way, some form, somehow. Grandfather in World War II in the Pacific, dad in the 82nd, other cousins and whatnot, family members that were in the Army and the Marine Corps respectively. Also family ties to law enforcement. It took a little bit of time before the light came on with me getting into law enforcement, but I did. And it was a fantastic journey, fantastic ride. I feel like I did pretty good work, and met some great people along the way, both on the military side and the LE side.
So explain what sort of trouble you were getting into. I mean, like if you knew that there was going to be some level of military service in your life, given the amount of family members that you had, why were you so off the discipline course growing up?
Well, coming from a broken family at age 14 and a half, alcohol was a major fuel, which was don't shy away from it. Had to rein that part of my life in. Just very, I wouldn't say I had, any kind of, no diagnosis of oppositional defiance, but when my parents split up, then I was hell on wheels, both in the house and at school and whatnot. Made good grades, went to college, got a degree. But the Marine Corps was really that wake up call. Like I was saying a few minutes ago, just a little slow on the uptick, to get into the military situation. Had a good friend of mine at the time, was a year ahead of me in high school. He joined the Marine Corps and he came bebopping in one day and he said, "Hey man, you got to check this out. You got to do this." And I'm like, all right, because I had gotten, not to bore the audience or bore you, Mark, but had gotten congressional approval letters to go to one of the service academies to be a pilot. That was my dream. Well, the fall of my freshman year in high school, I got portholes, glasses, and I knew right then and there that was going to go a wash as far as getting into the front seat of a fighter or any kind of aircraft. So I put that on the back burner, played sports, did have that at least going for me at the time as well. Played sports in high school, very active, and when my friend and compatriot came in and said, "Hey, I joined the Marine Corps. You got to get on board and do this." And I'm like, all right, because we ended up being at the same unit at the same time there in north central North Carolina. So it's where I grew up in the mountains. So like I said, went to boot camp in '89. Had a blast. For me, it was fun. It was that rough and tumble type situation that the Marine Corps provided and offered. And it was right up my alley. I was a small person at 5'7", maybe 5'8", on a good day, weighing about 100 and 135 pounds. So folks looked at me like they'd size me up, and that was a mistake. But got through it and excelled. And just from there, I never looked back. I had a goal. Worked with my dad. Had a fantastic recruiter. Sometimes people don't always have those stories in their background where they get messed over a little bit, where the recruiter promises or says one thing, but lo and behold, you're doing a different MOS or 13 Bravo or something like that in another branch of the service. So with my dad's experience, I got a great deal. I became a 2111 in the Marine Corps, which is a small arms repairman, or basically breaking it down a little further as an armorer. So I worked on small arms, weapons up to and including, the 50 cal, Mark 19s and all that. Our armory was small in Greensboro, North Carolina. So we went up to, at the time, the Echo 3, the M60, but then we transitioned over to the 240 Golf. So I had that, in my repertoire, if you will.
So how does the whole getting into law enforcement start? I mean, is it concurrent as you're getting out of high school and going in the Marine Corps, or no?
No, I got a degree from Appalachian State University in Boone, North Carolina, and in psychology of all things, and started out as a counselor. Believe it or not. And given what I've already said, or what I've already kind of outlined a little bit, and that was one of the goals. It was, I wasn't going to go active duty. I wanted to, try it out and see, how I would like it. And had good people in my corner that helped me through, those decisions. And, hit my first unit after boot camp and the schools I mentioned, armor school. and absolutely loved it. The contract was a 6x2 back in those days as a reservist, because my goal was, to get a degree. And I accomplished that, and was drilling at the same time. And I get a rap on the hatch one day from someone from the admin shop, and they were like, hey, you're about to fall off contract, because the time went by so fast and it was so fun that I didn't realize that 8 years, literally, because I had already rolled into my by 2 years where I was not obligated. I could have walked in on a Friday, Saturday, Sunday and said, yeah, I'm going to hang it up, within that 2-year, window. And I get this admin person coming up saying, hey, you're about to fall off contract. I said, contract for what? I was literally caught off guard, because, I was just in the moment where I was just enjoying what I was doing. And so we've got to get you re-enlisted. I said, well, you get the paperwork today and I'll sign it. I said, like most ghosts, quick, Ricky Tick. And so it worked out. So I extended. That was my first of many extensions. I got to the 10-year mark and kind of had to, look at that crossroad and say, okay, what do I want to do now as far as stay or get out? And the decision was easy. It was a no-brainer for me, given the size of my brain, I guess, at the time. It wasn't difficult. And I was like, hit me again. So I got another 4 years and another 4 years. And along, obviously promotions had come. And I became a platoon sergeant, the staff NCO IC of the Armory. I was, a trusted confidant with the commanding officer, given that position, and obviously the hardware that I was in charge of. And just kept re-enlisting, and then to answer your question about law enforcement, because I was still active and had to keep up, a level of, physical fitness and that kind of thing. I played basketball, played softball with, a bunch of friends of mine who were in the local sheriff's office at the time, where my office was just down the hall in the government center. And I get a call one day from a lieutenant over the investigations division. And he said, hey, can you have lunch tomorrow? And I said, absolutely. And so we meet for lunch, and he pitches this idea. He says, we need a juvenile investigator, and said, we'll put you through school. We'll cover your, a lot of your costs. But we need a juvenile investigator in the criminal investigative division. And so I didn't have to work the road. A lot of this stuff that I'll hopefully be able to touch on was very, very fortunate for me. Again, good people seeing me as someone with potential and set me up for success, many, many times, over my adult life. And so I took about a $6,000 or so pay cut. And I said, yeah, when do I start? Because that's what I had come to want to do. I was kind of like a badge chaser, if you will. I would do ride-alongs, while I was in the counseling phase, and just eating it up. It was just the adrenaline, the camaraderie, and that kind of thing. So when he offered it to me, I didn't hesitate, and so that's where I started in 1998 in law enforcement in North Central Western North Carolina.
Okay, so I just want to back up for a second. When you had enlisted in '89, the Gulf War kicks off in '91. Marines played a large part in that. Did you think you were ever going to go?
I did, but I missed it literally by 3 months. And wow. There wasn't much demand because I was a reservist. First of all, they didn't do what they did in 2001 and 2, and then again in 2003 with Iraq. So in 1991, there was a larger call for the active duty forces to be cobbled together to get into that conflict. So when I say I missed it, there was not a demand or a great demand for an armorer. The active duty folks had that nailed down. They had more rabbits in the cage, and they needed to bring me on. And I had that limited skill set. I had not yet gotten into different MOSs or gotten into different fortes that would be of any great benefits, because the unit I was in was a communications company. as a private PFC, Lance Corporal, et cetera, coming up to, before I attained E6. And so there just, like I said, there just wasn't a demand for an armor. So I maintained, helped out where I could, did some extra duties here and there for the unit, given that some of the guys did get pulled, for their expertise, and it was all in comm. So I just, went on. I didn't do really anything that I would say to speak of until I moved, based on a career move, down to Georgia in 2000, 2001.
Right.
And we all know what happened in 01. So,
well, where did it fit in for your timeline, your transition? Where were you on 9/11? What was going on from a civilian standpoint and military?
Sure. I had gone to a profiling school with the sheriff's office at the Western North Carolina Justice Academy. And I kept noticing a gentleman coming in and out, throughout the course of the week. And so me being the curious type that I generally am, I just hit him up on like late in that week, like on Thursday before we were testing out on Friday and all this other stuff. And I just introduced myself and I said, hey, if you don't mind, who are you? I've noticed you coming and going at your leisure, all week. Well, it turns out he was a GBI agent who had already been through the FBI Behavioral Health Services, or Behavioral Health Unit. And he was a certified profiler with the Georgia Bureau, the State Bureau. And we had a great conversation, super personable, man. He reaches in his, dress shirt, breast pocket and says, hey, by the way, we're doing a hiring process here coming up in about 2 months. If you're interested, go online, and he gave me the particulars. And the rest is kind of history. I moved down to Georgia after I went through the process, got selected. So I did pass the background and the psychological, and started with the GBI in February of 01. And obviously a few months later, I was at home getting ready to do my day's, tasks, at my office. And always had the television on, catching the news, and I saw what unfolded with the towers. And I knew right then that it wasn't a matter of if I were going, it was just a matter of when would I get that call. Well, it didn't take long, so the unit I transferred to in Georgia in 01 was a headquarters and service company. So we were cooks, bakers, and candlestick makers. We had all the commodities, admin, comm, motor tea, supply, the whole 9 yards. We were a service company. So the Marine Corps and the Department of Defense was concerned about the potential for casualties and literally deaths that would occur with a large-scale invasion going into Iraq.
Right.
So the only thing the Marine Corps had at the time was a legacy unit from Vietnam with a bunch of young guys that was the Graves Registration Platoon. So it wasn't even a full company. So the Graves Registration Platoon in Dayton, Ohio. So these guys got spun up, early, and they were the subject matter experts. So they went to Marietta, Georgia, Anacostia, Virginia, and I believe Colorado Springs in Colorado, and trained. We did a crash course, 2-week Mortuary Affairs, course, if you will, for lack of a better word, with those guys. And that was our mission. That's what we were tasked with.
Did you know anything about Mortuary Affairs at all?
No, quite honestly.
Did it bother you? Did it scare you? Like, what's your reaction to this?
Really just the unknown. The volume with which that we were getting, the fragos and the initial op orders and stuff like that. We didn't know what we were getting into. So in the meantime, we did we leaned forward with the units until they all kind of melded together in Marietta in 2003, early 2003. And we put together the plans to how we were going to, how we were going to structure ourselves and who was going to be in charge of what, when, where, and how. Because we had close to 550 Marines for just the Mortuary Affairs mission when you combine the 3 units together in 2003. So I ended up being the staff NCOIC. My CO became the OIC, and we were attached to the Gaining Force Commander out of one MEF, Marine Expeditionary Force, out of Camp Pendleton. So I deployed in 03 out of Pendleton. And then in 05, I deployed with 2 MEF out of Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. So, I made the decision, and I was approached, me and, a cadre of others, given what we had done in 03, and I'll come back to that a little bit to help, give some clarity on that. But, the dwell time for the Marine Corps was supposed to be a minimum of 18 months up to 5 years. Well, nobody knew that, at least at my level, that they were pushing down to us information-wise, that they anticipated it going that long. Well, obviously, it went much, much longer than anyone, when you factor in Afghanistan and Iraq as well. The long war, 20 years, almost 21. And so we were leaning forward, putting our sticks together and how we're going to push out in 03, and then again, obviously in 05. 03 was a different animal because everything was new. It was fresh. Nobody really had much of a clue. There were a lot of side conversations about, this, like you asked about fear and that kind of thing. The trepidation was, what are we getting into? What do we anticipate? Well, we couldn't know. It's about like a Pop Warner squad going up against, the New England Patriots back in the heyday, kind of thing, and so, but we adjusted. I think we, like typical Marines do, is, we improvise, we adapt, and we overcome. So we push out in March of 03 to Pendleton, and then off we go. We based out of Camp Iwo Jima in Kuwait before we were pushing sticks for. We watched the shock and awe and basically the invasion from the Chow Hall at Camp Pendleton. So about 48 hours or so later, we were on a C5, going across the country, across the pond, and, made a couple of stops, but then we spiraled into Kuwait International. And, we traveled, during the night. We took fire coming in, and, we got on the ground safely, and MOP level, I believe it was MOP 3 on our way to MOP 4. That was an interesting. I love to have had
I only chuckled because they sent us there with MOP gear and nobody ever actually needed it, not for like a second.
Well, as we were coming in, and the airport and the surrounding area, in Kuwait there was taking, rocket attacks and missile attacks and that kind of thing. They said, we don't know what the conditions are going to be like on the ground, so everybody suit up. And I know you and your audience, having gone over there and flown on different vehicles, different aircraft, the C5, you sit up in the top of it, facing the tail fin. All right. So you're facing backwards in respect. So the forward end of the seating was about probably somewhere in the neighborhood of about 45 to 50 degrees. Meanwhile, 50, 60 rows back, the kids, the Marines, were stripped down to their, almost their skivvies because it was so hot back there. So then they give us the order, to go to MOP level, and it looked like a gear bomb went off in the middle of that C5, in the passenger area. And so, but we did it and got suited up, and we hit the ground. We were ready to go.
Where did you land in Iraq? At Baghdad?
No. So in 03, we flew into Kuwait City, and then pushed north. And then in 05, we landed at T.
Yeah, I'm talking about in 03 when you pushed forward. Where did you push to?
We pushed Marines out. So we set up a theater mortuary collection point.
Okay.
And so again, because of the front load and the planning that we had done up front, we had broken down the basically squads. We called them sticks. And so we hadn't been on the ground long when an A-10 dropped a depleted uranium round. It was a friendly fire incident on the Nasiriyah Bridge. And Nasiriyah was a hot spot, during the initial phase, initial push. So we sent sticks forward. I was still in Kuwait, at that time. And we sent the sticks. The first place they pushed to was Nasiriyah. And because we had so many folks, we found other ways to bypass the river and sent sticks forward to link up with Victor units up in Baghdad, and that kind of thing, Fallujah, and all those areas that were where some of the heaviest initial fighting, was taking place. So it was Nasiriyah to start with. And what would be done is we basically recovered every single service member, regardless of service. It wasn't just Marine Corps centric. It was theater wide. It was theater mortuary. All right. So we owned the AO in that respect. So we would link up with the different units, traveling either by convoy or by air, to get to these spots where we were constantly getting, operational information of the fallen.
Let me understand. You had to go to where you were needed, right? Like you guys didn't set up for lack of a better term, a casualty collection point anywhere in Iraq. You were just called forward as necessary to come pick up the fallen remains.
Yes, and we were kind of the mortuary QRF, if you will, for lack of, it's kind of a bastard, my bastardized terminology, but right. But yes, but because we could radio ahead and message ahead to the forward units, they knew we were coming. Now we weren't always well received from the standpoint of, we got called all kinds of colorful names, from Grim Reapers to those kind of things. So we took it in stride. Hey, we had a mission. We understood the mission. We had planned and prepped as best we could. And so when they would link up, our forward elements would link up. Then if there was a firefight or, any kind of attack or anything like that, an explosive incident, our guys were either right there or not too far away.
What's it like? Let me start this way. Did you actually go on some of these missions to go retrieve fallen remains?
Yes.
What's it like the first time you do that and not really understanding or fathoming what you're about to walk into? Like, do you remember what you were thinking going into this whole thing?
Well, because of, even at the time, the limited law enforcement exposure that I'd had, I had seen all kinds of deceased human
right.
beings, whether it be from automobile wrecks, suicides, homicides, that kind of thing. So me personally, I just compartmentalized that. My role morphed a little bit more into making sure that the younger Marines were able to process, and literally process is a twofold definition. Process personally what we were all doing and what they were doing in particular, but also, what we call processing the remains. All right. Because there was very, very tedious, systematic. We didn't slow down the advance, but we also didn't get in a hurry, because our record will show in Marine Corps history that we didn't have any what's referred to as a dust wind. We had zero unaccounted for. Now, granted, you're not always recovering full bodies.
Yeah.
Okay. Especially depending on the catastrophic incident. If firefight, okay, it may be bullet wounds or some fragmentation from an explosion, something like that. But when AAVs and troop transports and trucks and everything carrying, a half a dozen or more service members, has a round dropped on it or rolls over an IED or something like that, we had to wait for, like your previous guest, earlier today or a couple of days ago, did route clearing and that kind of thing. We couldn't just go rushing in necessarily because, the MSRs were all bugged, 8 ways to Sunday.
Right.
So we'd get a path and we'd get in and we'd be able to do our work.
What did you tell, since you had this law enforcement experience, what did you tell your Marines about what they were about to walk into? Did you prepare them all for it? I mean, after they see it for the first time, what kind of conversations are they having with you? I mean, I've seen bad stuff and I've seen, dead, mutilated bodies, right? It's just part of combat. That said, I don't, everybody handles that stuff differently. Some people, are okay with it. Some people are not. And some people, you get the point. So I'm just curious on how you handled this as an NCO and what you did, how you dealt with your Marines.
Well, it was, if anybody was having,
a moment.
yeah. If they were internalizing it and it might manifest itself into like a personal trauma. Some people may have had loss in their life of various form or another, and it might have, restoked those kind of memories and that kind of thing. So I didn't sit down and do individual screenings with everybody. There was too many Marines that we had gotten together. But I made sure that if someone was having an issue, because we were so large in the rear, in Kuwait, that if I needed to unplug somebody and get them back to the rear and plug somebody else in their place, then I could do that. I had that latitude, and then as far as conversations, we were very, very much connected with the chaplain corps, and so I would say almost daily.
Any of your soldiers, or any of your Marines come to you after a given, pickup and say, "Hey, Sarge, I'm not good. This is messing me up." I mean, were
Yes.
those conversations out there?
Yes, very much so. Yeah. We had a very, very good balance, I would say, is a fair way to frame it, where we had a good balance of NCOs and staff NCOs that could see, and where I was a little bit higher up in the umbrella, so to speak, because of my role and assignment at that point. The senior staff NCOs and the junior NCOs would let me know, and sometimes they would take their own action and say, we need to help this one out, or we need to pull them and get them to the rear. It was similar, but it was still different in the rear, where you're still processing remains, but it's in a more not confined, but it was in a more secure area where they weren't necessarily out, in the sand, in the bush, if you will, having to worry about, what's to the left, what's to the right, and what's to their rear, whereas everybody had each other's back.
What's it like, knowing that you're seeing all this death and destruction, and you don't have to fire a shot in anger to see any of it? I mean, do you feel like was there a sense that you're bearing an unnecessary weight? I mean, or a necessary burden for, things that were out of your control?
Me personally, no, because I always.
That way you think?
I'm sorry.
Did others feel that way, you think?
Some did. We had, before we left, to go to Pendleton, we had a couple of conscientious objectors, and what they were allowed to do is, out of no reprisal or retaliation or anything like that, we left them at the training center, where they were still on orders and still able to function, but they were just further in the rear. They were still CONUS. So, and we actually had a couple that we sent back home after they had been out and had been exposed to the visual trauma.
Right.
And so we were like, hey,
go ahead. No, go ahead.
No. So we had a safety plan.
Okay.
As I would again kind of frame it, where we couldn't send everybody home. Obviously, we had a mission to accomplish. But the onesies and twosies that were having the hardest time grappling with the situation, you're talking 18, 19, sometimes 20, 21-year-old. And I say kids because I'm old enough now where I think
kids.
Yeah, I think I can say that now, given my position in life, not as a derogatory thing, but they were just young.
And have a life experience. They don't know that kind of, level of trauma or
right.
Injury.
Never been away from home.
Right.
Thought they were going to join the service in the Marine Corps and go, well, I'm going to go to college or get a job or what have you. And I don't think I'll ever get deployed. Well, like I started to say earlier, my first 11 years up until 2001, I didn't do anything very sexy, or anything like that. I was in the Armory doing my thing.
Right.
Transferred to Georgia and then boom. Was there
one or two particular cases that stick out to you still to this day?
Yeah.
Look, I'm not necessarily looking for gory details per se. If you'd like to share them, that's entirely up to you. It's your story. But I just, for the audience sake, I'm not asking you to tell me, oh, I saw this in his ear. Was what you get the point? Like,
No. I don't mind
the details. Go ahead. That's up to you. But I'm just curious, which ones sort of stayed with you, because after a while, you have to assume there's a certain numbness you get to this, and the compartmentalization of it, which we could talk about here in a minute, almost becomes dangerous sometimes because you don't ever process what you have just went through.
Very, very much so. Very much so.
So I asked, which ones stick out to you for a reason?
Well, the vehicle of the AAV in Nazareth was one, because there were so many folks that were in that vessel, and there wasn't much left of anyone inside. So we were receiving back, limbs, and thankfully in a way, we would obviously wear one dog tag around our neck, and then the other would go in a left or a right boot. I think that was almost universal with the services over there that were on the ground. And so that was how we, in part, how we were able to identify, a lot of folks. So that was one. We had an F-18 go down in 2005. And unbeknownst to the recovery crew, because we were located right next to the SSTP, which is a surgical shock trauma platoon where all the docs were, and rightfully so. So if someone came in and expired, we were right next door, essentially, to not be parading someone around on a gurney or, a litter or something like that. But this F-18 pilot came in, and he actually had pin flares on him. So everybody's, John Brown hind part sort of slammed shut a little bit, going, we just brought this person, this service member in with essentially live explosives. So I was able to work with, EOD they were hours away.
Oh,
so, obviously, they had their mission and everything like that. And we just didn't have anybody where we were at TQ that was on a rotational, basis where they were coming back and getting, a little rest and respite, so we didn't have that. And so using common sense, I was able to remove the flares and do a cursory on the rest of the remains and ensure the safety of the folks, the Marines, there at the collection point, that that they could do their work and feel safe. And there were a couple of them that said, "Hey, we trust you, Gunny, but we don't know." And so therefore I had to get Marines together, in a hurry, to be able to process, the pilot.
Right.
And then the last one, and I don't mean to, sorry to jump around, between 03 and 05, but it was basically the same mission. Well, 03, we learned a lot. And we started writing the SOPs for what's now the Mortuary Affairs, with a personnel retrieval and processing unit that is also at the reconnaissance compound there in Smyrna. And in 05, we were additionally tasked with recovering military-age males, the Amans that were there in the villages and there in the cities that we were that the Victor units and the infantry were operating in. And so we recovered 2 small children that were casualty of war, essentially, and they weren't the only ones. We had civilians, we had contractors, we had and that was the expansion from 03 to 05. It wasn't just the services, but what I don't know at what level the Department of Defense or Joint Chiefs or whatever saw what was happening with the collateral damage to the civilian population over there. And so we got additionally tasked with, if there was a situation like that we would also recover the civilians and get them back to the family members or their village, their outlying area, whatever. So we became that arm of, we had that added to it.
When I talk to, whether it's medevac pilots, docs, medics themselves, they always seem to get stuck the most on the children.
Yeah.
They never forget the children, the casualties that are children, or the children they couldn't save because, obvious reasons, right? One, they're not supposed to be in combat. That's number one. Number two, it's just that understanding that there's a young life taken way too soon. And, the idea that you couldn't save them it weighs a lot on people's souls. So I certainly understand that. At what point for you does recovering remains, does it ever get personal? And I guess what I mean is, after a while of doing it, you detach yourself emotionally from it just as a defense mechanism, right? Without being callous, and I think anybody who's been in combat can understand. So if you're a civilian and you're listening, you get to a point where you go, it's another dead body. Got it. Noted. Okay. Like you see enough, like there's enough, bad things that happen. You just kind of get used to it. Okay, a bomb went off. Get your head out of your ass. Keep going. You don't ever, you just start to become numb to it, as I said before. I say all that to say the processing of remains and bringing home any part of a fallen soldier is so important. One, because obviously we don't leave anybody behind. That's number one, right?
Number one. Yeah.
We're still searching for MIA and POWs and everything else that we presumed to be dead at this point in time, but we never stopped looking. But two, to give the family some sort of solace, some sort of comfort, even if you're only returning a body part. At what point did it, what level of personal was that, as I stutter with the question here?
Sure. For me personally, all right, so this is an opinion of one. All right. You can talk to 50 other people, Marines or service members, soldiers, Navy, Air Force, whatever. And everybody's maybe going to have their different personal takes. So with me, every one of them were personal because just to digress for just a moment, not only was the Marine Corps, huge for me in my late teen years. Well, my brother was murdered in 1992. And subsequent to that, my dad committed suicide in 1993.
Jesus.
So, I've dealt with it, in a variety of ways, some constructive, some not so constructive. But to me, and it also on the law enforcement side, every time I got called to a deceased person, it was always personal because of my family history and my exposure, to what had happened to immediate family members. So I took it very, very literally and very, very seriously, which no one that I was ever associated with didn't, because it was, I say this, and it's not to gloat or sound braggadocious, but I think that sometimes people fed off of me to maintain as much positivity as we could, given what we were tasked with having to accomplish. And again, I'm proud of the fact that the record speaks that we had 0 dust winds. So what would happen is we would get them to whichever collection point, 03 Kuwait or 05, Iraq. And if it was in Fallujah, they would process there and then return the remains to us at the main collection point. And we would do, and for that matter, Al-Assad, we would receive everything. Even though they'd been processed, we'd go over the paperwork, do a double check, what have you. And then we would do the dignified transfer with the C-130s. And there was a movie, I don't watch it very often, but there was a very good movie with Kevin Bacon. It's called Taking Chance. If you've never seen it, I would encourage you to do so, because it picks up with Kevin Bacon as a Marine Lieutenant Colonel who volunteers to go to Iraq to receive the remains for the command of a Lance Corporal from, I want to say it was from Montana. And it basically picks up where we left off. We never sent anybody with the remains. They were always escorted with folks on the transport, whether it was a helicopter or C-130, what have you. But the story picks up where he receives remains and gets the Lance Corporal back to his family, and it was very, very moving. And it picks up the process, if you will, where we relinquish control of the remains, and the command liaison would then escort them back to Dover. They would do the DNA processing at that point, the very sophisticated, and do verification on our work, and then obviously that would go further down the line for funeral arrangements, family contacts, et cetera. So, but they were all personal. I can't remember every single name. We did, in those 2 years that I deployed with that mission, we did over 600 in those 2 blocks of time. And so, and again, some of them were locals from the indigenous area, in TQ, but we were all over the AO, like we said early on, is all the way out to the Korean village, Haditha, Ramadi, Fallujah, Al-Assad, everything in that province was ours, when it came to recoveries.
I mean, I need to answer both questions, but I want to kind of backtrack a little bit because I'm wondering how overwhelming, if at all, this got. I mean, after the first deployment, was there ever a sense where you're like, okay, I don't want to do that mission again? Like, I'll go back, but I don't want to do that again. And when you get called back for the same exact mission, are you like, I don't, is there any of you that's like, I don't want to go through this again? I mean, how do you not get affected by it?
Well, that's where I'll touch on a little bit of a stump, but that maybe if we don't run out of time, I'll dive a little more deeply into that. So the short answer was no. My unit again was if they told me to go peel potatoes, to feed the masses, then I would have done that. I had no misconceptions about the value, the mission orientation, the value of the mission, and the overall success and the overall accomplishment. So I think I started to allude. I was approached between 03 and 05 in Korea, and said, I was told, hey, we're pumping out again. We're going back in 05. You can either go with this group, or you can go with the follow-on group that would be our RIP, that would be our replacement. And I said, well, I'll go with the primary, And so in January of 2005, only 16 months after having been over there, I went back, but again, the learning curve was, it was steep, but we had good commanders and good officers in place and good senior enlisted that we had a much, much better grasp the second time around than we did the first. Now in 2004, when Fallujah was hot and going on, we had Marines living with the remains in the potato factory in Fallujah. And so you can imagine, you got rancid potatoes and you've got remains, so that weighed heavy on some folks. And there were guys in the group, probably like, and you've heard tell of, they would come home and stay for 30, 60, 90 days, and they were gone again, attached to somebody, and they just kept racetracking it, and they would go and, not always with Mortuary Affairs, I'll qualify that, but they would link up and join another unit, and they'd go right back to the fight, and they did it time and time and time again. So I guess to really come full on your question is the groups that were selected in 2005 as compared to 2003, because we'd already been in the conflict now at that point for 18, 20 months. And the trepidation of the casualties and the deaths had gone way, way down. All right. So rather than having another group of 500 plus go back over in 2004 and or 2005 and then years beyond, the two groups that went in January and then we got replaced in September of that year, they were basically handpicked, and they were given the option, again, with no reprisal, to say, no, I don't think so, kind of thing. So we went back with a much, much scaled back group in 2005 than we had in 2003. And they were the ones that either handled it the best, or they wanted to serve. They got something out of the 2003 evolution, and they were like, this is about the most honorable thing, other than, taking a bullet for your buddy to your left or right or whatever, and some would debate that, but I don't, but collecting the remains and making sure that we got our service members, our brothers and sisters, back home to their families was tantamount. There was nothing more important than that, so.
I agree. It's an interesting mission. One that I could never do. I just know myself. And I'm wondering, at any point in time, was this guy who signed up for the Marine Corps and wanted to be all gung-ho, is there any part of you that's like, hey, I actually want to get in the fight, not just deal with the after effects?
Honestly, if I had been called to actually, throw lead at the enemy or to lay suppressing or covering fire or anything like that, if we were out on a recovery or anything like that, well, then of course, I would have done it, without hesitation or remorse for that matter, but, I'm going to tell on myself, it was good to be where we were set up to do the mission and how we were able to do it. Now I'm not saying that we were sitting around in hammocks in 2005 waiting for remains to roll in. No, we were still pushing sticks, to all these various locales, where the fighting was the heaviest, or we had gotten, I believe it was, we were there for the elections in 2005, and we were also there for Phantom Fury. So we didn't get to the point, our level of engagement, our forces didn't get to that level where they were pulling folks like us, where we had a very specific mission. We weren't babied, but we were treated a little differently by the commanders, because of everything we've been talking about for the last several minutes about, the trauma, the process, the internal processing, and that kind of thing. So I have to give credit where credit's due from the standpoint of we were already stretched psychologically.
Yeah.
So to send young Marines or folks with no experience other than a rifle range to go and get in full-scale engagements or something of that nature was not smart. And the higher ups saw that and said, okay, if we get to the point and the poop has hit the fan, then we'll, all hands on deck. Every Marine's a rifleman. All right. But it didn't get to that point. And the commanders that we had, not only my OIC, but the battalion commander, the gaining force commander, everybody up and down the chain knew who we were.
Right.
Because, and they would come it didn't take but about one visit to the collection point where we had, a couple of generals, we had a couple of, full-bird colonels, lieutenant colonels, staff members. I guess partly it was to check on our welfare, but I think there was some morbid curiosity as to just how we operated from that level of supervision. And they would come and they would see, and they were like, holy crap. I'm really watching my language just to not turn anybody off, but I could be real colorful. But, they had that oh crap moment, and they're like, whatever we need to do for these people to get them through, and this goes again back to your question, I do digress just another moment, is we were scrutinized is one way to put it, but with the medical corps, with the corpsmen, with the docs, the psychological folks that were on station. And then when we got back to CONUS, got back to our unit in the stand down time before we got cut back loose off of orders to our families and civilian lives, they had afforded the opportunity for counseling and to get whatever they may not have gotten off their chest in theater to get it off their chest before we turned them loose back into society, And I'd say that there was a high percentage of success with that, but there were still some folks that, couldn't be reached and went, off the rails a little bit. But since 2005 to now, currently, the jumps in well-being for that particular unit, not that everybody doesn't deserve it. Don't get me wrong. I'm not taking anything away from a grunt or an infantryman or a machine gunner or a mortarman or a pilot or anything like that. But the volume of which we saw what we did, 600 plus, coming through a collection point, there was a bit of, well, we're gonna look out. And this is a tricky thing to get into. We were on the radar as far as coming back from the mission, where we were afforded opportunities to get whatever services that we felt that we might need.
Right.
Put it like that.
No, I understand. And for the audience out there listening, I saw value in this. Because, we spend so much time on combat and we talk about the effects of it and what it is and everything else. And look, I've said this 100 times on this show that not everybody gets to kick down the door and bring a bad guy to justice. That's just not the way the military is structured or works, and nor should it be. Everybody's got a piece of the pie, but this is just one of those pieces that so few do, so few want to do. And it is one of those things where the after effects of it are lasting on a lot of people. So I felt like it was important to share this and understand it, because I think that, this component of it is almost never talked about. We just deal with the emotion, right? Now, the physical part of this whole thing that has to happen is really, really important. Again, it goes back to that whole thing. We don't leave anybody behind. It doesn't matter if we bring back a pinky. We have to get something.
Yes.
That is, that's an important mission for all of us. So
100%. So that's, if you don't mind, that's a decent segue. And we can circle back and close any loops that you would like. But if and I'll speak to the audience just, briefly, if there's any service member that's within earshot of this, that deployed, or maybe even didn't deploy, but they were ripped away from their family, put on a base for, and I know the Army had it worse than we did. The Marine Corps put their foot down and said, okay, we're not putting Marines in harm's way for any more than 7 months at a time. Now the orders were for 12 months, but that was the workup, the deployment, and then the post-phase return. All right. So yeah, I was on orders in 05 for 12 months, but I was only in theater for 7. All right, from February to September. The Army had it far worse, where they were getting tapped with 18 months consecutive. They might get R&R in Qatar, or they might get a family wellness, shot back home. But that created a little bit more angst where, oh, I'm home. I don't want to go back. I'm home. And so that wasn't, it worked out the majority of the time, but there were some, incidents and issues where service members said, you're going to have to come find me. I'm not going back, and depending on the exposure, rightfully so. But if there's a service member out there that it doesn't matter, I did 30 years as a career reservist. All right. I'm proud of that. But, that was my 1 weekend a month, extended ATs, 2 weeks a year, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. It doesn't matter if you did 2 years 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, 10 years, and you got out. My role right now, like I said, it was a segue to reaching out to veterans, get your service records. You can go to any VA community-based outpatient clinic. They've got brochures, pamphlets, whatever, helping you get your service record, your medical record, anything like that. If you had a hangnail on active duty because you were subject to presidential recall orders, you need to collect your information and go to a veteran service organization. And the main one that helped me with the VA was the Georgia Department of Veteran Services. Now you can go, there are VSOs at the VFW, the American Legion. There's several that are out there. All right. You just pick the one that you're most comfortable with. Just somebody that will advocate for you, that knows what they're talking about, but that will advocate for you to get services at whatever level that you need. Maybe your ears ring, maybe you've got bad neck or back issues, what have you. You've got heart issues, hypertension, hypervigilance, combat stress, anything like that, is to get the care and get the services that you deserve and that you rate, and be healthy and be smart, be wise, and take care of yourself, because you're good to no one if you can't take care of yourself and you can't take care of your family, you can't meet responsibilities and obligations. It's heartbreaking to hear about the number of veterans, out there that either don't know how, or are just, so closed off. Again, talking about compartmentalization, it's a process. You have to be willing. You have to be willing to take the step and let someone be your shepherd and get you through to the services that you need. That's my part of my stump, if you will, part of my message. I wanted to at least touch on today with you, and I appreciate the opportunity. But don't wait, because I can honestly say that when I filed with the VA back in 2012 and 2013, it was arduous. It was tough, because the VA is so large and they serve so many veterans and everything that, it takes a while for you to get either confirmation or approval or a rejection or something like that, and if you get rejected, file again.
Yep. There you go.
Be that squeaky wheel. All right. Whether you get, a rating of, let's say, of 10%, or somebody's out there walking around right now that should be 100% permanent and total, and they just don't even know it. So I would say, don't wait, because it is a process. It does take time. So I'm here by phone, where I've helped, since I've retired and had more time. I've probably helped going on a dozen service members get in contact with the VA or with the service organization so that they can push forward. And I get nothing out of it except for the personal satisfaction of saying, hey, I helped someone. my whole life, whether it's been Marine Corps and Mortuary Affairs or law enforcement, my whole life is adult life anyway. Once I got out of my funk, has been about helping people, and so there's no reason for me to stop or slow down now just because I'm air quote retired. It's a matter of if there's somebody out there in need. I don't have all the answers, but I know people who have answers, and I might have to contact 3 or 4 or 5 individuals to get a person pointed in the right direction. So, I have no magic bullet, I have no magic pill or anything like that, but I know people that know people that know people. And for the sake of getting someone a service that they may need and think, oh, well, I didn't do 20 years, or I didn't do 22 or 25 or 30 or whatever, I don't rate it. That's not accurate. That is not accurate.
Just for the sake of the audience, as a career reservist, I will just tout some of your other kind of assignments across the years because they're worthwhile. I mean, you were all over the globe: Hawaii, Estonia, Latvia. Where else am I missing here?
Korea,
yep. Australia at one point. I mean, you did it all as a reservist. I mean, you can have the best of both worlds, folks. Just for a message out there for any young people who might be listening to this, it's okay to be a citizen soldier. It's okay to be a civilian soldier or Marine and do them both. It doesn't make you any less than anybody else. I've done them both. I've been on active duty. I've been in the Guard. I'm transferring to the reserves. I mean, it's it's service, right? And that's the most important thing. I do want to ask you real quick, about your civilian law enforcement background and everything else. I mean, you were a bomb technician, and you also were a special agent for GBI, Georgia Bureau of Investigations. I'm just curious because this case was very popular here in Georgia, and a lot of people may have heard it, but the Ahmaud Arbery case and trial that went on down here in Georgia, I noticed that was on your list of assignments, so to speak. Just out of curiosity, what was your connection to the case?
At the time when we got involved, nobody really had a total and complete understanding as far as what we would find through our independent investigation. All right. And so I want to be real careful to not ruffle feathers or say maybe the wrong thing. But my connection was at the time, I was in the crime scene investigations unit. So I went back and did some reconstruction, did some, obviously, updated photography. We did drone flights, things of that nature to reconstruct and recreate as best we could without literally getting too personal for the people that were affected, the victim's family, and then others involved on the other side. So that was my role. We did a ton of, so if I wasn't, messing with a drone or taking photos or doing, reconstructions or whatever like that, Google images and things of the like, then we were out pounding the pavement, and we did probably, I don't know how many interviews we did in about 3 adjacent communities to where the events, unfortunately took place in the neighborhood. But we did, and that was all, part of the case file. And I certainly was not any part of the lead or anything like that. I was, part of the task force that was put together, to get to the bottom with the information that was out there and available that we could find out. And so that's what we did. The trial unfolded such as it did. When you have that many attorneys representing that many people, then it can be a little muddy to say the least. So I didn't have really anything to do with the court aspect of it. I did my work, turned it into the case file, and then
again, I just for some background that doesn't involve you saying anything. Ahmaud Arbery was a young black man who was out for a run. He was accosted by 2 or 3 white gentlemen who thought he was trying to break into properties. This is down in southern Georgia near Savannah, down in that area. And long story short, they accosted him and they shot him and killed him. What had happened on the side, for those who aren't familiar with the case, you can Google it. But the DA down in the county over there had muddied the waters through some, let's just say, questionable ethics in the way they handled the initial investigation of the whole thing. which took a delay in actually arrests happening and charges happening and so on and so forth. Hence the independent investigation that you had referred to before, that GBI had taken a part of to sort of lay out the rest of the events without any sort of cloudiness that was otherwise done by the original people, and they had to actually move the trial out of the county that the crime happened in to a different county just to make sure that everything was on the up and up. So that's sort of a Reader's Digest version of the background of it. But it made national news. If you were under a rock at some point in 2021, you missed it. But if you weren't, you probably heard something about it along the way. So leaving the politics out of it, I was just kind of curious as to how you got involved with that when it was all the way down there. That's why it kind of struck a note with me.
Sure. So the Bureau has 15. They have multiple offices.
Sure, yeah. I figured that much, but I just didn't realize you would have to go that far.
Well, I was actually working down there. My office actually did the independent. Okay. Yeah, so I was right there in the middle.
Look, talks between Marietta, Smyrna, and Peachtree Corners. I didn't know you got all the way down to Glenn County down that way. So I didn't realize that.
Yeah, in a previous life, I worked with the majority of my career with the Bureau, the Georgia Bureau, northeast of Valdosta, which is off I-75. Yep. That was I spent a number of years down there, and then.
Got it. Okay, now it makes sense.
Then I transferred by my own request to the coastal office, unbeknownst to me. This was in 2014. Unbeknownst to me that somewhere in my future that this case would, develop.
Well, that's why now it makes sense. I didn't know that you geographically were down there. I had assumed because I saw Marietta, Smyrna, and we had talked before recording Peachtree Corner, you were sort of Atlanta metro area, not all the way down 4 hours away. So that's why.
Yeah, my wife and I are up in northeast metro Atlanta right now, and so just enjoying life, So.
And you're retired from law enforcement as well?
Yeah, I did 25 total years in law enforcement, 30 years in the Marine Corps.
2 pensions you're working for you. Pretty nice,
well,
huh?
That's a bit of another stump that I might get a little heated over. Well, and I'll be brief, because this is a personal affront to myself and many, many others. So the reservists, and again, I don't want to dissuade anybody from your comments about, it's a good opportunity. There you get GI Bill, lots of benefits you could rate, down the road, whatever. It's honorable service to join any branch and serve your country. It's marvelous. But reservists in general fall under Title 10. I think the Guard may or may not, because they're they're state asset, but they do fall under the federal umbrella from time to time. So talking about 2 pensions, no.
I know where you're going now. Yeah. Oh.
I have to wait until I'm 60 to see 1 penny. Hopefully I'll make it that long, which is about another 7 years. And so, I wish that there was a different, and I've written letters, I've tried to talk with, congressional folks and all that, about, if you do 20 years in the reserves, all right, let's just say round numbers, and you retire because you rate a retirement at 20 years and 1 day. All right. How about a little severance or something, maybe an early collection of your quote unquote pension and you don't have to wait until 59 and a half or 60 or what have you. The government in its infinite wisdom kind of backdoored and rear-ended the reservists.
Oh, yeah, because, look, you're not going to get an argument from me on this. You're actually going to get concurrence. When that was all put together, the Guard and the Reserves were never used to the level that they were in the global war. That has now changed the game. I've spent, I've spent about 6 years in the Guard on active duty. Yes. So that's in addition to my active duty time. So, yeah, there needs to be a course correction on that across the board. And anybody who spent any time in who doesn't have an AFS, an active federal service pension, who doesn't have 20 years of active federal service would agree. We kind of got the short end of the stick here and the idea is to hang on as long as possible. It goes close to 60 to collect a drill check as opposed to a retirement check.
One quick comment on in that respect. So in 2003, when the reserves got called up in mass, it wasn't long after that the government said, we will shorten the time period below age 60 for you to receive your retirement, your pension, whatever, day for day, as long as you're 90 days or more on orders or on active duty. Okay. Well, that was 2003. What they did is they rescinded that, and they made it retro to 2008. So if you deployed before 2008, you don't get to cut that time off below age 60.
Oh, that's nice.
2008 and beyond is where you get the creditable active duty time to shave off day for day. Again, 90 days or more, shave off day for day below age 60. So that, that's a little stick in my craw a little bit, and that's all I'll say about that. I'm not trying to pull Forrest Gump, but.
No, I get it. Trust me. It's a sore spot for guardsmen and reservists. A fight another day, but
sure.
Look, I mean, it was excellent hearing your story. Again, I saw so much value in having the conversation about mortuary affairs, because it really, it's an untalked about part of our military service, and what you had to deal with and what you had to go through, and so many people who, you see it on the news and it seems so seamless, fallen soldier, oh, they're home. And there's a lot of legwork between that goes on, that is tough, and it's arduous, and it's not easy. And again, as I said earlier, it's not a job that people sign up for.
Right.
It's not. Nobody enters the military going, I want to handle dead bodies. Like, that's just not.
Yeah. It certainly doesn't rank high on the list of, that's what I signed. That's what I want to do. I want to jump out of planes. I want to climb, mountains, and, scuba dive and the whole nine yards.
I just want to blow stuff up.
Well, check out Taking Chance. It's with Kevin Bacon. I think it's well worth the watch. You may have a Kleenex or something beside you, and it's got a little bit of emotional trauma attached with it. So just be advised. If you're not up for it, then by all means don't watch it. But it's based on fact, and it's a very heartfelt, well put together. Movie, and again, it picks up where we would leave off in theater, and it chronicles the journey of how the service member would be returned home for their final resting place. So, but to close out, thank you so much for the opportunity. I appreciate it. I hope I lended some clarity. Lots to talk about. I could go on, but I won't. Just want to say thank you, and continue what you're doing with the podcast. There's a couple other things. One individual, Mark, who's under the weather right now. It'd be fantastic if you and him get linked up to hear his story. Oh boy, he's something else. But he's doing he's on the board and the foundation, the ground floor of the United States Marine Corps Reconnaissance Museum, because he was a force reconnaissance guy. Anyway, I can elaborate on that, offline or whatever if you're interested. But
I appreciate the suggestion. It's always great to have personal suggestions from our guests. But yes, it was great to talk to you. I'm so glad we got a chance to connect. And I know you're here in Georgia, so hopefully we'll cross paths soon, face to face. But certainly,
I enjoy that
and everything else. So, Jamie Karnes, thanks for being part of the Hazard Ground.
Right, thank you.
You've been listening to the Hazard Ground podcast, hosted by Mark Zinno. If you have an interesting story to tell and you'd like to be on the show, send us an email at producer@hazardground.com. And if you like the show, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.